Hello and welcome to another Artis Opus video. We're tackling white scars, white armor, and this one is an interesting one. I've got a pretty in-depth explanation of the process of painting white in this video. It includes me screwing up. We've left that in there, or some content regarding that in there, because I think that a lot of people may have the same issues that I've had. I do really recommend people watching all of the how to do white part of this video. It's quite long, but it is a difficult task to accomplish at a high level with an efficient speed. I think I've got a fantastic result. The edge highlighting we got with the dry brushing especially, I think was insanely crisp. I have weathered my guy afterwards, completely optional. If you want an airbrush version of how to do white scars, check out Cut of Paint's tutorial, it is amazing. I'll pop a link below. And the blue tint that I have on my model, you could knock that right back by including more white in your first step, or Darren Latham used Karak stone in his recesses. I've used a bluey tint, he used like an off beigey tint. It's up to you, you can mix anything in with that white contrast paint to tint it in any direction you want. You could put a little bit of black in there to make it darker. You could put a little bit of warm brown in there to keep things warm, a neutrally brown like the Karak stone, or you could go the other way like I have and put in some of the blue tint. There's some really interesting stuff in here, including dry brush use with contrast paint in the mix, which is not something I've ever seen done before and I've barely done myself. Super interesting, and that was really, really important for maintaining coherency throughout the paint job. So that's it. It's been a long time coming. I hope you enjoy. I'll catch you on the other side. Before we jump into the actual painting, just a couple of quick points about assembly. I've left this guy open, and I do that with quite a lot of my models, especially if I'm going to be using dry brushes. It helps me gain access to it, you know, I've got to be able to get in there. Also, I really love the cool chest details and stuff like that. It's a shame to obscure them. I don't have the option of making his arms removable, so that's another reason to do it particularly carefully. The other thing is I've just chopped a little flat bit on the bottom of this helmet. That's going to allow me to pop it on a stick, which will help me get easy access. Head is the most important part for kind of personality of the miniature, and I just find it really beneficial to be able to get good access to it. First paint we're going to be using is the Contrast Apothecary White. As you can see, this has got a blue tint. That is a theme I'm going to be continuing with this model. I'm going to shake the living hell out of this before we use it or even mix with it. More pre-painting. We are painting white here, and that comes with a couple of requirements. One of them is that we avoid contamination at all costs. So here you'll see not only is this slightly old water with some dusty bits floating in it, it's also slightly blue. Even though that is the one color that would work perfectly with this, because we've got kind of a blue tint going on anyway, we're going to make sure that everything is completely clean. This includes the brushes, you know, see a blue hint in these as well. All of them are going to be scoured before beginning, or I'm going to at least check them and make sure that they're clear. So I'm going to clean out my water pot and return with some clean water. I do not want anything involved in this process that is not either white or clean. Finally, we can get to preparing our model. We have some clean water. I've also cleaned my brush. That should be free of contaminants. I'm going to take the cleanest well of my palette. There we go, and we're going to make up our base mix. So I've shaken the hell out of my Apothecary White. May as well shake it once more because it can settle, especially if you're working from a palette. I want to take a nice, well mixed couple of blobs of it. I will think roughly about the ratio I'm using here. So I've taken 3 scoops of that, and then the color that I'm going to be adding in is a little bit of Thunderhawk blue, just a kind of nice toned down cool grey. Mix a little in there. I can't give you an amount for this, it's just a very small amount, and essentially you're just looking to just about tint your mix that you've got. I can test this out on my palette because I've primed it in the correct colour. Doesn't look like it's too extreme. I'll start on a shoe, boot, and we'll go from there and see how he's looking. Might be a little bit too subtle. I do want this to be a little bit darker in the recesses. That's fine. Add a little more. About the same amount again. Now this is looking pretty dark against my white palette. I've primed with a light grey, so this is it's not going to stand out as much here as it does there, and that's another perfect reason to have a point where you can test on your palette. I will try out his other toe. Right, that is about right. I've got a nice big brush, so I won't have too many trips to my palette. I'd recommend a minimum a size 3 for this. I'm using a 4. And we're just going to make sure that we hit every single area of this model with a consistent thin coat. If you've got too much anywhere, because you've got a big belly brush, you can just get in there, use it as a sponge, and if you've not got enough, you can wipe it and that'll deposit a large blob. Work your way back and forth, make sure you're happy with the amount. I've given this ample time to dry. I want to point out a couple of my mistakes with the contrast stage. I think people don't put enough thought into stuff like this. This section on the toe here, I could have just dropped some in that section. How pointy and lovely is that brush? Size 4. You do not need small brushes. Not for this stuff anyway. So this section here, I should have dropped something in, and this toe here, I tested out the lighter wash on it and then didn't give it some attention with the heavier one. I should have absolutely done that because I want those recesses to be shaded. This panel here is looking really nice. To go to the back, what we have here, hopefully this shows up, is a tidal stain. This is from me missing a bit, not realizing, and going back when it's semi-dry and reawakening the paint, but not on the edges of where I finished. Silly mistake, we will try and fix that. Aside from that, it is not too bad. I should have just been a little bit more careful. Things like this elbow pad are a perfect example of, you know, contrast or washing going right. Like, that's really good. I've added a load of detail there, all in the right places with the right amount. So what I'm going to do is reawaken this brush, take a little bit of my contrast mix it around on the brush, and I'm going to carefully drop it in these areas. I can't fix the tea stain one, but I can absolutely fix these. Probably sick of me banging on about big brushes, but I do love them. Okay, so there we go. So that's fixed those sections. Like I said, this one here, I can actually see if I can do something about it. I'm just going to try and darken it all in general. I'll fade it in this direction, clean out my brush, and then I will try and softly absorb on this edge, or at least fade it out, feather it out a bit to soften it. I don't think there's too much I can do about that though. It is what it is. You guys can probably see a fair amount of stuff that wasn't on my palette, and I haven't shown what it is or how I got there. The reason was I've been working out how to do this myself, if I'm completely honest. So I have on my model something that I would regard as a failure, which is this slightly more chalky looking section here. Now this has happened for two reasons. Number one, you've got to be super careful with white, with dry brushing. It looks chalky more readily than any other color. And number two, when I primed this model, I did not get a good enough coat of grey cere on the guy's shins, and that makes the transitions between the darker colour and the lighter colour more obvious and exaggerates them. What I am pleased with is this guy's shoulder pad. Look at that, that is awesome. So I am now going to show you how to achieve that. This has been done with dry brush and I've mixed in some contrast paint. So prepare for some weird stuff that you definitely haven't seen covered before. Ever, I imagine, because I wasn't expecting this is how I do it. So how I'm going about this is I've got Monuments Bold Titanium White. You could use a slightly softer white. This is a badass coverage white, but I'm okay with it for these purposes. I have a brand new foam in my dampening pad. This is the, I think it's like the third foam I've used since starting the channel, so they do last a long time. I get asked it a lot, and part of the reason for using this is because I don't want contaminants. Normally it really doesn't matter, especially if you let it dry out between sessions, but I'm being super careful on this one. So I'm going to dampen my brush. Really important, I don't want too much coming off, but I do want the bristles to not be dry. And now what we're going to do is, first of all, I'm going to very carefully sneak from the edge of my texture, bring on from the edge of my texture palette my dippy palette. This is the same mix that we base coated with. Work that into the bristles, work it around the bristles. I'm using a medium here, could be using a small if you wished, but I'm happy with a medium. I'm then going to take some of that bold titanium white and mix it into the brush from all angles. Now, as I banged on about, my palette has been primed. I can check that things are subtle enough. I'm cool with that. And we're going to try and replicate what we got on this shoulder pad on this one. So test on the base rim first. You barely want anything leaving. Then it's really important, you've got barely any paint on the brush and you're going to have to work quite hard for it to leave. You don't want to push it off, you want to buff it off and just be patient. So you can go in circles, you can go backwards and forwards, you know, whatever works well for you, but make sure the model is stiffly braced. You don't want it moving around, that will help the paint leave. You can even race it down on your palette. Just going to reawaken this a little bit. Not going to add more paint yet. There we go. So hopefully you can see that starting to take shape on the model. I can't bring it closer to the camera than this because I'm holding it down on the table to keep it super stiff and super secure. So I've also glued it to its base very firmly. You can probably hear it working. And then if we bring this up, lovely, smooth, high quality edging, and we've also even managed to fill in volumes like that shoulder pad. Now I mixed it with a contrast. What I can do is back to dampening pad. We are being careful with this. A little bit more of the white, mixing it in the same place on my palette. I am not going back and taking more of the contrast. I've just got what's in the bristles, what's on the palette. And there we go, we can get some, look at that. Edge highlighting at its best because we didn't have to edge highlight. Now I'm feeling really confident with the color I've got on the brush and how much is coming off. Look at that. That is really high quality dry brushing there. Probably doesn't look like I'm paying much attention. It's because I'm not. I've done all of my pre-work as long as I've got the right amount on the brush and I'm happy with the color. And I've put a pre-highlight for this section with the contrast mixed in the previous section. That will allow it to land more softly. That's your fat highlight if you're talking heavy metal styles. What we can then do is fairly confidently making sure that we're not using a dry brush while dry brushing at any point. Pop back, take some more of the white, and then continue. Now I appreciate that is one hell of a lot of information on, you know, just doing the same thing, but I think it's really important and I think this result is going to be pretty outstanding. I will be covering over a shin that I'm not happy with. Though we got there, and I think that is brilliant. I've just blocked in a couple of details on him. I've mixed a little bit of Huldra blue with the Apothecary white and I've dotted that in recesses. I think that looks okay. He is very icy currently. We will be countering that with some dust and weathering and chipping. And aside from that, I've blocked in with Eshin Grey, his piping between his sections, which has just helped separate the piece. Don't know whether I should be doing the belt black at this stage, but let's rock on with the scary stuff. So let's start putting some red down on this dude. Conveniently, I'm going to be hiding his first experimental leg, which I'm not happy with some markings, so psyched for that. Interesting note here. Here I have my transfer sheet. I am going to be using transfers on this dude, even though I'm not a huge fan. What I want to do here is just make sure that my red is as close to the red on the transfers. So I'm going to pick a random one that I'm not using, and I've got some Evil Suns here. Just going to put a little blob on. I'll grab some of this done, or maybe I'll grab some Pro-Acryl. This looks, when it's dried, like it might be quite a good comparison. And I'll just let those dry, and whichever is the closest color, that's the one that I will pick. I've actually gone with a little mix of Wild Rider Red and Evil Sun Scarlet because on my tester I just need to be a bit more pastel. So I'm going to base coat the details, including the insignia on its chest with my mix, and catch all the details on the rest of the model with the same colors too. These are going to get washed, by the way, don't worry about how incredibly bright they are. Okay, so we're looking pretty tasty. I have had some issues with this transfer. I don't know what's encouraged it to wrinkle. The rip is just something that can happen. So I'm going to take you through my fixing of that. Obviously I specifically color matched prior to this, didn't realize it would come in useful for this reason, but what I'm going to do is just try and fill in the gap that I have here, which will work wonders. You could leave it and paint it like it's damage, but you know, I think at this stage I'm just going to choose where to put down damage myself. It's a little bit more textured than I'd like, but we just have to deal with it. Now it is time for something really unconventional. I want to do a little bit of highlighting on my red sections, and I want to try out something that I've had an idea for a while. So what we're going to do is a little bit of masking tape, which I am going to remove a lot of the stickiness from on my clothing. I'm going to mask off around the top of this section. Now, what I want to fix is the fact that this arrow should really, now I do need to get this line right. That is okay. This arrow should really be getting bright towards the top, like the rest of the shoulder panel that it has. Now you could approach this with glazing, but I want to see if there is a way, before I die due to sausage finger issues while trying to do a delicate task, if there is a way to make this work with a bit of masking and then dry brushing. So maybe I can chop this in half. Okay. And then I think there's a little slither. Nudge it this way. All right. There we go. That took longer than I wanted, but now we can try my funky idea out. So our red was a mix of two colors, which conveniently at this stage is going to mean that we can jump to the brighter of the two, which is Wild Rider. We are using the baby D here, the extra small, so I'm going to be proceeding with absolute care. Everything is to be done on a minuscule level with this brush. You want to avoid oversaturating it. What I'm looking to do is be able to buff my highlights at the top of this. I might have to go to an orange, but I just want that arrow to get brighter at the top. I can already shade it to keep it in line with the rest of the panels with the same bottom line. I want it to get brighter at the top. Got a tiny bit of fire dragon here. What I will do is take a smidge, mix that in delicately. Hopefully we can buff this arrow up. So you're up to pure fire dragon bright. Nice. Okay, like 15 attempts later, but that has actually done something, so that's something I can reserve for a future occasion if needed. It's time for the weathering. I'm just using Eshin Grey, which is basically a soft-ish mid-tone, and what I'm going to be doing here is covering up any bits where my base coats that I covered didn't work perfectly. So I've got this detail here on the greave, for example. What I'm going to do is just try and basically break up that line. Obviously I don't want to completely follow it down, but there is a fair bit that I can do to distract from it. A little bit of tip drying, but just make sure that your paint remains workable. Thinned, of course. And that you don't have too much or too little on your brush. I'm trying to concentrate a lot of the wear and tear on the lower part of the model or on bits where he would be protecting himself. So, you know, not so much on his back or back areas, but knees, anywhere that it gets scuffed if you fell over. And I'm trying to bear in mind direction, so you know, concentrating on the edges of the panels, that type of stuff. He's looking great. I'm going to highlight up his insignia with just a transition through the reds. I can jump from this to Troll Slayer, which we don't have elsewhere, but jumping all the way to Fire Dragon Bright felt a little bit crazy. And then what I've got available, if it starts becoming too orange, is a little bit of Blood Angels Red. I can use that, and I can also pop some Holger Blue in the recesses if I want to, you know, exaggerate any of the required contrast in that zone. Okay, so I'm going to begin with Evil Suns, nice and dilute. I don't have too much on my brush. These details are so skinny that it's really important to not be overloading things. And then basically it's just a matter of not rushing. So you'll have a better side and a worse side. You can turn your model upside down if it's helpful. And then I'm just going to highlight these, and I will add in proportionally more of my brighter colors towards the edges of them and just be covering a smaller and smaller area. Okay, now taking a little bit of our Wild Rider, mix it in the same spot on the palette, just like we do with our dry brushing. Pull a little bit of our previous color through for coherency. Notice I'm rotating my miniature. I keep my hand at the same angle, try and keep it steady. Really helpful on delicate details. and I'm ending my stroke at the end where I want it to be brightest. So I've grabbed a bit of Fire Dragon Bright. I've also got a little bit of luminous orange, or fluorescent orange rather, Vallejo's. You can use whichever brand you prefer. And this is to make sure that I don't go too much towards the pastel-y colour of the Fire Dragon Bright. We've got quite a lot of metallic paint on our palette here. I didn't need that much, but it exploded. So, so I'm going to mix it with a little bit of 950 black, a little bit of Ultra Blue. What I'm going to do is just carefully coat each panel of this bolter with this. Should get brilliant coverage, but if you need to do 2 thin coats, that's far better than 1 thick one. This is optional. All the chipping and weathering is fully optional, actually, but I wanted to show you what you can do if you're feeling like being fancy on someone to accentuate chips. So I've just got some of my white here, my monument white. You can see my nail is covered in little scratches. That is for me to make sure that I have the right amount of paint at the right consistency leaving the brush. And then what I'm doing is I'm taking the details that we have and really carefully underlining them with white. This is to simulate the bottom of them reflecting light, or there being a different paint underneath, or it having chipped down to cleaner paint or something like that. So yeah, I've done that on a few of his chips just to make him look super fancy. While we are at it, the eyes, they're actually done super simply. So I've dotted them. I'll show you on the right one. I've dotted them with a white just to make sure things stay nice and bright. And then my very, very simple method is using a color that I discovered in our fluorescence video, which I really, really, really like. And it's 1 coat of that. You know, it looks like I've done more on there, but I've done 1 coat of it, and then I've just glazed it around the eyes. So make sure everything is nicely diluted. You don't want any of this thick. Over that white, just using this green, you can still get a pretty good result. And then what I've done for the glaze is to water it down quite a lot, like a lot, and have a very small amount of it on my brush. And then I'm carefully just washing it around the eyes. Now, because I've made them darker because of the chipping, this actually looks way better than it would have if this guy didn't have dark sections around his eyes. It look a bit pastel-y, but I'm super pleased with how that looks. And then as far as tying him with his base goes, just got a little bit of Doom Ball here. I'm really going to dilute it quite a lot. See it behaving weirdly on the grayscale on my palette. Okay, and then I'm just laying a foundation in the recesses. There's no point him being super weathered from having a hard campaign and it not showing on the rest. What I am trying to do though is when I put it down, popping off, I'm using a 1M here because I quite like it for washy stuff. It holds a lot of paint in a short brush. So I'm just pushing my stuff back into the recesses and making sure I don't get any tidal marks, building that up, and then going through adding a little bit of Scrag Brown and Fire Dragon Bright for the rest of it. I'm going to wash this several times until it's been darkened down quite a lot. Careful on the first one, and then you can go a little bit heavier on the consecutive ones once they're going over a surface that's already been primed with a Nuln Oil. And give those several washes, and then that will allow me to make it look pretty aged. And I can just go in there with a bright silver and put some scratches around the edge to make sure that it matches with the rest of the dude. While I've got the Nuln Oil, the areas that I've greyed out, so his trunking and stuff in his legs, I'm going to give that a few washes. I really want to darken it down and make the pale armour stand out in comparison, so I'll get that all over, including exhaust outlets and stuff like that, and some sections that I feel should be pushed to look deeper. I'm just going to give it a general edge highlight. Now, I'm not going to do this consistently. It's not like every edge is going to get the same highlight, and I will put on some little scratches and details. Here he is again, super pleased with most aspects of him, maybe just not the red eagle on his chest. I was expecting there to be more, it's quite rounded. I wanted harder edges to make it easier to get crisp lines down it or to be able to get more out the washes. Bit more practice needed there. The scratches came out all right in the end. I've not done those for a while. Obviously, I've mentioned it several times. It's up to you whether you want to weather it, not weather it. Just take away the how to paint white bit, change the white recess color. All of that is completely flexible. Don't worry about watching my tutorial and then just keeping the method, but swapping out the colors. I would absolutely recommend it to let it fit with, you know, whatever you need to. Please like, comment, and subscribe. If you have any suggestions for stuff that you'd like to see me tackle, that kind of combination of contrast and dry brush is definitely something I want to push further. They're both organic techniques, and one handles the recesses and the other one handles the raised areas. So with just like 2 steps, you can get 5 different degrees of depth within a model or something like that. I think that's amazing. So I'm definitely going to be trying to push more with that in the future. And I love the concept of contrast paints in general. I think it's a really, really good idea. So thank you very much for watching. Please subscribe, hit that bell notification to be notified for future content. I'll catch you in the next video.